Hey you guys, it's Shamika T. So I want to make this video because I do not trust at all the following: the Department of Revenue and most of the hearing officers that I've been before as it relates to child support. And here's why. In practicing in Florida as a licensed attorney for 8 years, there is not one time I can tell you I felt like I walked into that hearing room before a child support hearing officer, not a judge, a circuit court judge. I'm talking about a hearing officer. And I felt like I was on the same playing field as the attorney who represents the Department of Revenue. So with child support, you have most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, you have the mom asking for child support from the Department of Revenue. The Department of Revenue is represented by an attorney who is the Attorney General's office. So what happens is that a private attorney like myself, usually, not always, is representing the father. I've had 2 hearings before 2 separate hearing officers in 2 separate counties in the state of Florida. And I promise you, I had to make sure that I said, may I speak? May I have the witness so that way I can ask questions? Can you pass the witness, etc.? What does that mean? That means in both of those hearings that I just had within 2 weeks in separate counties before 2 different hearing officers, it was almost like I was invisible. They literally were getting ready to take the argument and the opinion from the attorney who represents the Department of Revenue. So what I had to do was make sure that I was on my P's and Q's and knew all the numbers, because I already had my numbers prepared before I went into the hearing. And I had to inquire, ask questions to my client and say, well, what about the daycare costs? And what about the fact that you have another child support order? And what about this? And what about that? The reason why that's important is because I know a lot of you guys cannot afford lawyers. I get it. I totally do. But you cannot afford, and I rarely ever say this, but you cannot afford to walk into a hearing officer courtroom and go through child support without knowing all the ins and outs of how they're going to calculate it. Because they're going to sit there and be running the numbers and everything is going to go way past you. They're not going to tell you about Smith credits. They're not going to talk to you about deviations. They're not going to do any of that. Their goal is to make sure that you pay the highest child support possible. Why? How will we need hearing officers if we're not talking about child support? That's really the main goal of the hearing officer. Why will we need the Department of Revenue if ain't nobody collecting child support? Hello, it's a business. So, having said that, do not go to a hearing before a hearing officer where the Department of Revenue is involved by yourself. I hope that helps somebody.